This is a true story about the Dyatlov Pass incident, the mountain that keeps its secrets. Part 1. The Ascent into Darkness. The wind howled across the Ural mountains like a banshee's wail, carrying with it the promise of death. On the morning of February 1, 1959, 9 young hikers stood at the edge of the known world, their breath crystallizing in the -30-degree air as they gazed up at the treacherous slopes of Siak, the mountain of the dead. They could not have known that this Mansi name would prove prophetic, that within hours they would become part of a mystery that would haunt the Soviet Union and the world for decades to come. Igor Dyatlov, 23 years old and already a veteran of the wilderness, adjusted his pack one final time. His calloused hands, steady despite the bitter cold, checked the straps with the methodical precision of someone who understood that in the unforgiving Urals, the smallest oversight could mean the difference between life and death. Behind him, 8 companions, friends, lovers, fellow students from the Ural Polytechnical Institute, prepared for what should have been the adventure of their young lives. The group had been planning this expedition for months. Their destination, Odortin, a mountain whose name meant "don't go there" in the local Mansi language. It was a fitting goal for these ambitious young Soviets, members of a generation that had been raised to conquer nature, to push beyond the boundaries of what previous generations had deemed possible. They were the children of the space age, living in a country that had just launched Sputnik, believers in the power of human will to overcome any obstacle. Zinaida Kolmogorova, 22, the only woman among the group's core members, stamped her feet against the cold. Her dark eyes sparkled with the same fierce determination that had driven her to become one of the few female engineering students at the institute. She had argued passionately for her inclusion in the expedition, refusing to be deterred by those who questioned whether a woman belonged on such a dangerous journey. Now, as she stood in the shadow of the mountain, she felt vindicated. The wilderness did not discriminate based on gender. It tested everyone equally. The other members of the group moved with the easy confidence of youth. Rustam Slobodin, 23, cracked jokes to lighten the mood, his laughter echoing off the snow-covered peaks. Yuri Doroshenko, 21, and Yuri Krivonishenko, 23, the 2 Yuris, as they were known, shared a cigarette and discussed the technical aspects of their route. Nikolai Thibault-Brinal, 23, whose French surname made him an exotic figure among his Russian companions, double-checked his camera equipment. Alexander Kolvatov, 24, the group's quiet intellectual, made notes in his journal about the terrain. Georgy Krivonishenko, 23, and Semyon Zolotaryov, 37, completed the group. Zolotaryov was the elder statesman of the expedition, a World War Roman II veteran whose presence added gravitas to what might otherwise have been dismissed as a student prank. His weathered face bore the scars of fighting the Wehrmacht, and his eyes held the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had seen humanity at its worst. Yet here he was, choosing to spend his precious vacation time with these young people, drawn by their infectious enthusiasm, and perhaps by a desire to recapture something he had lost in the trenches of the Great Patriotic War. The plan was ambitious but achievable. They would ski north through the wilderness, following a route that would take them past abandoned settlements and through territories that few humans had ever traversed. The journey would test their endurance, their technical skills, and their ability to work as a team under extreme conditions. If successful, it would earn them a grade Roman III certification, the highest level of achievement in Soviet mountaineering. Their equipment was state-of-the-art by 1959 standards. They carried a specially designed tent constructed to withstand the fierce winds and heavy snows of the Urals. Their sleeping bags were filled with down, their clothing layered for maximum insulation. Each member carried a backpack loaded with food, spare clothing, and emergency supplies. They had cameras to document their achievement, journals to record their experiences, and enough provisions to last them 3 weeks in the wilderness. As they began their ascent, the group moved with practiced efficiency. They had trained together for months, building the physical conditioning and technical skills necessary for such an expedition. They knew each other's strengths and weaknesses, had developed the kind of trust that comes only from shared hardship and mutual respect. In the photographs they took during those first days, they appear relaxed and confident, young people at the peak of their physical and mental powers, ready to take on the world. The first few days proceeded without incident. They made good time across the relatively gentle terrain, their skis cutting smooth tracks through the pristine snow. At night, they pitched their tent in sheltered locations, huddling together for warmth as they shared meals and stories. Dyatlov, ever the responsible leader, maintained detailed records of their progress, noting weather conditions, terrain features, and the group's physical condition. The weather, however, began to deteriorate. What had started as a crisp, clear winter day gradually gave way to overcast skies and increasing winds. Snow began to fall, first in gentle flakes, then in driving sheets that reduced visibility to mere meters. The temperature dropped even further, reaching levels that made even the slightest exposed skin vulnerable to frostbite within minutes. By January 31, they had reached the edge of the highland zone, where the trees began to thin and the terrain became increasingly treacherous. Here, Yuri Yudin, the 10th member of their group, made the decision that would save his life. Suffering from a recurring illness that had been exacerbated by the cold and exertion, he chose to turn back. It was a difficult decision. He had trained as hard as any of them, had looked forward to this expedition for months. But wisdom prevailed over ambition, and he bid farewell to his friends, promising to meet them at the end of their journey. The remaining 9 members continued north, their silhouettes growing smaller and smaller against the vast white expanse of the Urals until they disappeared entirely, swallowed by the mountain wilderness. Yudin was the last person to see them alive. On February 1, they reached the base of Kalatsiak. The mountain loomed above them, its slopes swept clean by the relentless wind, its peak shrouded in clouds that seemed to press down from the gray sky like a massive hand. The local Mansi people considered this mountain sacred, a place where the spirits of the dead wandered freely. They had named it well. The Mountain of the Dead had claimed many lives over the centuries, and the indigenous people gave it a wide berth. But the Soviet Union had no patience for such superstitions. These young people had been raised to believe in the power of science and human determination to overcome any obstacle. They approached the mountain not with reverence or fear, but with the confidence of conquerors. They were Soviet citizens, inheritors of a revolution that had promised to transform not just human society, but humanity's relationship with the natural world itself. As evening approached, they made camp in a protected area near the tree line. The wind howled overhead, but their tent provided adequate shelter. They prepared their evening meal, a simple but nutritious combination of dried meat, bread, and hot tea. In the photographs taken that evening, they appear tired but in good spirits. Someone had fashioned a makeshift newspaper from their supplies, and they passed it around, reading articles aloud and commenting on the events of the outside world. Dyatlov made his final journal entry that night, noting their position and their plans for the following day. They would ascend to the plateau, establish a supply cache, and then push on toward their ultimate goal of Oddorton. The weather was deteriorating, but they had planned for such conditions. They had supplies, they had experience, and they had each other. As they settled into their sleeping bags, the wind outside continued to build. Snow pelted against the tent walls with increasing intensity, and the temperature continued to drop. But inside their shelter, warmed by their collective body heat and protected by their carefully selected equipment, they were safe. They had no way of knowing that forces beyond their understanding were already in motion, that their carefully laid plans were about to be shattered by something that would defy explanation for decades to come. The last photograph in their cameras would be taken the following day, showing the group cutting into the mountainside to create a level platform for their tent. They are bundled against the cold, their faces barely visible beneath their protective gear. But their body language suggests determination and camaraderie. They work together efficiently, each person contributing to the collective effort that has brought them this far. But as darkness fell on February 1, 1959, something went terribly wrong on the Mountain of the Dead. What happened next would become one of the most enduring mysteries of the 20th century. A puzzle that would confound investigators, inspire countless theories, and haunt the families of the victims for generations to come. Part 2: The Night of Terror. The tent should have been their sanctuary, a fragile barrier between 9 young lives and the howling wilderness of the Ural Mountains. Instead, it became the epicenter of a catastrophe that would challenge every assumption about human behavior, natural phenomena, and the very nature of reality itself. As February 1st gave way to February 2nd, something extraordinary and terrifying occurred on the slopes of Kalatsiak. The precise sequence of events would remain forever shrouded in mystery. But the physical evidence left behind would tell a story so bizarre, so utterly incomprehensible, that investigators would struggle for decades to construct even the most basic narrative of what transpired during those fatal hours. The tent, discovered 3 weeks later by search teams, presented a scene that defied all logic. The structure itself remained partially intact, still anchored to the mountainside by ropes and stakes, but its fabric had been slashed open from the inside. Not torn by wind or damaged by falling debris, but deliberately cut by the occupants themselves. as if they had been desperate to escape something inside their shelter. The cuts were clean, made with knives, and they were located at positions that would have allowed rapid exit directly into the sub-zero night. Inside the tent, investigators found a tableau that suggested normalcy suddenly interrupted by chaos. Personal belongings were scattered, but not ransacked. Food was still being prepared, suggesting that whatever happened occurred during or immediately after the evening meal. Shoes and outer clothing remained in the tent, indicating that 9 people had fled into the -30-degree night wearing only their underwear, light clothing, and in some cases, a single boot or shoe. The question that would haunt investigators for decades was simple yet unanswerable. What could have driven 9 experienced outdoor enthusiasts to cut their way out of their only shelter and flee into certain death in the Siberian wilderness? The trail of footprints leading away from the tent provided the first clues to the group's final movements. The prints, preserved in the snow for the brief time before wind and weather obscured them, showed that all 9 individuals had left the tent together. They had not scattered in panic, but had moved as a group, walking in single file down the slope toward the tree line nearly a mile away. The footprints showed no signs of struggle, no indication that they were being pursued or forced to move against their will. More mysteriously, the footprints indicated that some of the group members were barefoot, while others wore only socks or a single shoe. In temperatures that could cause frostbite in minutes and death in hours, they had chosen to abandon their protective gear and trek across the frozen landscape with virtually no protection from the elements. The search teams, led by volunteers from the Ural Polytechnical Institute and supported by military personnel, followed the trail down the mountain. What they found at the bottom of the slope would add new layers of mystery to an already incomprehensible situation. At the forest edge, nearly a mile from the tent, the searchers discovered the remains of a small fire. Around it lay the first bodies, Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko, the 2 Uris who had been inseparable friends in life. They were found wearing only underwear, their hands burned as if they had been desperately trying to build or maintain the fire. The scene suggested that they had made a heroic effort to create warmth and light in the darkness. But the fire had been insufficient against the brutal cold. The state of their bodies provided the first hints of the bizarre circumstances surrounding their deaths. Both men showed signs of severe hypothermia, as would be expected given their exposure to the elements. But they also exhibited injuries that seemed inconsistent with their environment. Krivonishenko's hands were badly burned, and pieces of his skin were found in the mouths of his companions, suggesting that in their final extremity, the survivors had been driven to desperate measures. The discovery of the fire site and the first 2 bodies only deepened the mystery. If the group had been forced to abandon their tent by some immediate threat, why had they not returned once that threat had passed? The tent was still standing, their warm clothing and equipment still available. Even if they had initially fled in panic, why had they not regrouped and attempted to return to safety? The search for the remaining 7 members continued, hampered by severe weather conditions and the vast expanse of the search area. 300 meters from the fire, searchers found the body of Igor Dyatlov, the expedition leader. He was found face down in the snow, his arms positioned as if he had been trying to climb back up the mountain toward the tent. His clothing was slightly better than that of the two Urals. He wore more layers, but still insufficient for the conditions. His body position suggested that he had been attempting to return to the tent when hypothermia finally claimed him. Nearby, search teams discovered the bodies of Zinaida Kolmogorova and Rustam Slobodin. Kolmogorova was found frozen in the snow, her body positioned as if she too had been trying to return to the tent. Slobodin's body showed evidence of a severe head injury, a fractured skull that forensic experts would later determine had been caused by a blow, equivalent to that from a heavy baton or rock. The discovery of 5 bodies within the first few weeks of the search provided some answers, but raised even more questions. The pattern of their deaths suggested that they had been attempting to return to their tent, but had been overcome by the cold before they could reach safety. This supported the theory that they had fled from some immediate threat, but then tried to return once that threat had passed. However, the nature of Slobodin's injuries introduced a new element to the mystery. His skull fracture was severe enough to have caused immediate unconsciousness, yet there was no evidence of external trauma consistent with a fall or accident. How had he sustained such an injury in the middle of the wilderness? And why had his companions not attempted to help him? The search for the remaining 4 members, Thiboks-Brignol, Kolvatov, Zolotaryov, and Dubinina, would prove even more challenging. For months, rescue teams combed the mountainside, using probes to search beneath the snow and following every possible trail. The families of the missing students maintained pressure on authorities to continue the search, refusing to accept that their loved ones might never be found. It was not until May 4, 1959, that the final 4 bodies were discovered, buried beneath 4 meters of snow in a ravine near the tree line. The discovery site was only 75 meters from the fire where the first 2 bodies had been found, yet it had taken months of searching to locate them. The bodies had been preserved by the cold and the snow, allowing forensic experts to conduct detailed examinations. What they found defied all explanation and would fuel decades of speculation about what had really happened on the mountain of the dead. The 4 bodies found in the ravine had died from hypothermia, like their companions, but they also exhibited injuries that seemed impossible given the circumstances of their deaths. Lyudmila Dubinina, the group's photographer, had sustained massive chest injuries. Her ribs were broken, her heart was damaged, and the force required to cause such injuries was equivalent to that of a severe car accident. Yet there was no evidence of external trauma, no bruising or cuts that would indicate a fall or impact with a hard surface. Nikolai Thiboks-Brignol had suffered a severe skull fracture, similar to that found on Slobodin, but even more extensive. The injury had caused immediate death. Yet again, there was no evidence of external trauma that could have caused such damage. Most disturbing of all, Dubinina's tongue and eyes were missing. The soft tissues had been cleanly removed, and forensic experts could not determine whether this had occurred before or after death. The precision of the removal suggested that it had not been caused by scavenging animals or natural decomposition. The clothing found on the 4 bodies in the ravine provided another puzzle. Some of the garments showed evidence of radioactive contamination, raising questions about what the group might have encountered in their final hours. The contamination was not severe enough to have caused immediate death, but it was sufficient to be detected by investigators and would later fuel theories about military testing or nuclear accidents. The official investigation, led by prosecutor Lev Ivanov, struggled to make sense of the evidence. Every conventional explanation for the deaths seemed to be contradicted by the physical evidence. If the group had been attacked by wild animals, why was there no evidence of animal tracks or defensive wounds? If they had been caught in an avalanche, why was their tent still standing? And why were their injuries so selective and precise? The investigation considered and rejected numerous theories. The possibility of an attack by local Mansi people was dismissed when it became clear that the indigenous population had been nowhere near the mountain at the time of the incident. The theory of a military accident was explored, but abandoned when no evidence of weapon testing or troop movements could be found. Most puzzling of all was the behavior of the group itself. These were experienced outdoor enthusiasts who had trained extensively for this expedition. They knew the dangers of the wilderness and had prepared accordingly. What could have driven them to abandon their only shelter and flee into certain death? The investigation files, classified for decades, would later reveal that prosecutor Ivanov had been deeply troubled by aspects of the case that seemed to defy rational explanation. He had received reports from other hikers in the area of strange lights in the sky on the night of the incident. Military personnel had reported unusual phenomena in the region around the same time. The radioactive contamination of the clothing remained unexplained. Faced with a case that seemed to have no satisfactory solution, the official investigation concluded that the deaths had been caused by an unknown compelling force. It was an admission of defeat, an acknowledgement that the Soviet system, for all its confidence in the power of science and rational inquiry, had encountered something that it could not explain. The families of the victims were left with more questions than answers. The official explanation satisfied no one, and the classified nature of much of the investigation only fueled speculation that the authorities were hiding something. The incident was officially closed, but the mystery it represented would only grow more compelling with time. Part 3: The Endless Questions. The snow that had claimed 9 lives on the Mountain of the Dead would eventually melt, but the mystery it concealed would prove more enduring than the Ural winter. In the 65 years since that fateful night in February 1959, the Dyatlov Pass incident has evolved from a tragic mountaineering accident into one of the most analyzed, debated, and mythologized events of the 20th century. The immediate aftermath of the discovery was marked by official silence and bureaucratic stonewalling. The Soviet authorities, uncomfortable with any event that might suggest inadequacies in their system or phenomena beyond their control, quickly classified the investigation files and declared the case closed. The families of the victims were told that their loved ones had died in an unfortunate accident, and further questions were discouraged. But the families would not be silenced. The parents, siblings, and friends of the 9 young people who had perished on Khalat Siak demanded answers that the official investigation had failed to provide. They organized their own inquiries, interviewed witnesses, and kept pressure on authorities to reveal what they knew about the incident. Their persistence would eventually force the case back into the public eye, but it would take decades for the full scope of the mystery to be revealed. The first breakthrough came in the late 1980, during the period of glasnost, when Soviet authorities began to release previously classified information. The investigative files, made available to researchers and journalists, revealed the extent to which the official investigation had been stymied by the bizarre nature of the evidence. The reports contained details that had never been made public. The strange injuries to the victims, the radioactive contamination of their clothing, the reports of unusual lights in the sky. Prosecutor Lev Ivanov, who had led the original investigation, broke his silence in 1990. In a series of interviews and articles, he revealed that he had been pressured by his superiors to reach a conclusion that would not embarrass the Soviet system. He admitted that the phrase "unknown compelling force" had been his compromise solution, a way of acknowledging that something extraordinary had occurred without specifying what that something might have been. More controversially, Ivanov revealed that he had personally believed the incident to be connected to secret military testing in the region. He claimed that he had been told by his superiors that the area around the Mountain of the Dead had been used for weapons testing, and that the hikers had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. However, he had never been able to obtain concrete evidence to support this theory, and it remained speculation. The release of the investigative files sparked a renaissance of interest in the Dyatlov Pass incident. Researchers, journalists, and amateur investigators from around the world began to examine the evidence, proposing theories that ranged from the plausible to the fantastical. The case became a touchstone for anyone interested in unexplained phenomena, attracting attention from serious scientists and conspiracy theorists alike. The most conventional explanations focused on natural phenomena that might have caused the hikers to flee their tent. The katabatic wind theory suggested that a sudden, violent downdraft had created conditions inside the tent that made it impossible to breathe, forcing the occupants to cut their way out. The avalanche theory proposed that the threat of an impending snow slide had caused the group to evacuate their campsite, only to be caught in the open when the avalanche occurred. However, these theories struggled to explain the specific injuries found on the victims. The massive chest trauma suffered by Dubinina and the skull fractures found on Slobodin and Thiboksbrignol seemed inconsistent with exposure to natural forces. The missing tongue and eyes remained unexplained, as did the radioactive contamination of the clothing. More exotic theories began to emerge as researchers grappled with the inexplicable aspects of the case. The military testing theory gained traction when it was revealed that the Soviet Union had indeed been conducting secret weapons tests in the Ural region during the 1950s. Some researchers suggested that the hikers had been caught in the blast zone of an experimental weapon, explaining both their injuries and the radioactive contamination. The UFO theory, while dismissed by many serious researchers, found support among those who pointed to the reports of strange lights in the sky and the otherworldly nature of the injuries. Proponents of this theory argued that the hikers had encountered something not of this world, and that the official cover-up had been designed to hide evidence of extraterrestrial contact. Psychological explanations focused on the possibility of mass hysteria or panic that might have caused the group to make irrational decisions. The infrasound theory suggested that low-frequency sound waves, generated by the wind passing over the mountain, had created a sense of dread and disorientation that led to the tragic evacuation of the tent. Each theory had its proponents and its critics. The scientific community remained divided, with some researchers insisting that a conventional explanation must exist, while others acknowledged that the case might represent something genuinely anomalous. The lack of living witnesses and the deterioration of physical evidence over time made it increasingly difficult to test new hypotheses. The families of the victims, meanwhile, continued their own quest for answers. They organized memorial services, established scholarships in honor of their lost loved ones, and maintained pressure on authorities to keep the case open. The Dyatlov Foundation, established by relatives of the victims, became a focal point for research and commemoration. In 2019, 60 years after the incident, the Russian authorities announced that they would reopen the investigation. The decision was prompted by advances in forensic science and the availability of new investigative techniques that had not existed in 1959. The renewed investigation would examine all the evidence with modern methods, hoping to finally provide answers to the questions that had haunted the case for 6 decades. The new investigation, led by the prosecutor's office in the Sverdlovsk region, focused on 3 main theories: avalanche, katabatic wind, and military testing. Using computer modeling and forensic reconstruction, investigators attempted to recreate the conditions that might have existed on the mountain that night. They examined the terrain, analyzed weather patterns, and consulted with experts in fields ranging from meteorology to ballistics. In 2020, the investigation announced its conclusion. The deaths had been caused by a delayed avalanche triggered by katabatic winds. According to this theory, the hikers had pitched their tent on an unstable slope, and the unusual wind conditions had caused a small avalanche that damaged the tent and forced the occupants to flee. The investigators argued that the injuries found on the victims were consistent with being caught in a snow slide, and that the strange behavior of the group could be explained by the disorientation caused by the sudden disaster. However, this official conclusion satisfied few of the case's long-time observers. Critics pointed out that the new investigation had failed to explain many of the most puzzling aspects of the case, including the radioactive contamination, the precise nature of the injuries, and the missing soft tissues. The avalanche theory also struggled to account for the fact that the tent had remained largely intact, and that there was no evidence of avalanche debris at the campsite. The debate over the Dyatlov Pass incident continues to this day. Internet forums, documentaries, and academic papers continue to dissect every aspect of the case, with new theories emerging regularly. The incident has inspired novels, films, and television series, each offering their own interpretation of what happened on the Mountain of the Dead. Perhaps the most significant legacy of the Dyatlov Pass incident is not the mystery itself, but what it reveals about human nature and our relationship with the unknown. The case represents a collision between our desire for rational explanation and our fascination with the inexplicable. It reminds us that despite all our scientific advances and technological capabilities, there are still phenomena that defy our understanding. The 9 young people who died on Khalat Siak have become more than victims of a tragic accident. They have become symbols of human curiosity, and the price sometimes paid for pushing beyond the boundaries of the known world. Their story continues to inspire new generations of investigators, researchers, and adventurers who refuse to accept that some questions cannot be answered. The Mountain of the Dead keeps its secret still. Every winter, snow falls on the slopes where Igor Dyatlov and his companions met their fate, covering the landscape in the same pristine white that concealed their final moments. And every spring, that snow melts away, revealing the rocky terrain that holds the only true account of what happened on that terrible night in February 1959. The families of the victims, now elderly themselves, continue to seek closure. They have buried their loved ones, honored their memory, and worked to ensure that their sacrifice was not in vain. But the questions remain. What drove 9 experienced hikers to flee their shelter into certain death? What caused their inexplicable injuries? What was the source of the radioactive contamination? And why, after more than 6 decades, do we still have no satisfactory answers? The Dyatlov Pass incident stands as a testament to the limits of human knowledge and the enduring power of mystery. It reminds us that in a world increasingly dominated by information and explanation, there are still places where the unknown holds sway. The Mountain of the Dead earned its name long before February 1959, and it has proven worthy of that designation ever since. As investigators continue to examine the evidence and propose new theories, the 9 young people who died on Khalat Siak remain forever frozen in time, their final moments as mysterious as they were tragic. They had set out to conquer a mountain and ended up becoming part of its legend. In death, they achieved an immortality that their young lives had only dreamed of, though it came at a price that no one would willingly pay. The story of the Dyatlov Pass incident is far from over. As long as there are questions without answers, as long as there are people who refuse to accept the impossible, the mystery will continue to evolve. New evidence may emerge, new theories may be proposed, and new technologies may be applied to the case. But the fundamental questions that have haunted investigators for more than half a century show no signs of being resolved. Perhaps that is as it should be. Perhaps some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, serving as reminders of the limits of human understanding and the vast expanses of the unknown that still surround us. The Dyatlov Pass incident has become more than a true crime case. It has become a modern myth, a story that speaks to our deepest fears and our most persistent hopes. In the end, the 9 young people who died on the Mountain of the Dead have achieved a kind of immortality. Their names are known around the world. Their story has been told in countless languages, and their mystery continues to captivate new generations of investigators and storytellers. They had set out to reach the peak of Oddorton. Don't go there, in the Mansi language. Instead, they found themselves at the heart of a mystery that has proven as enduring as the mountains themselves. The wind still howls across the Ural peaks, carrying with it the echoes of that terrible night in February 1959. And somewhere in that wind, perhaps, are the answers to the questions that have haunted us for so long. The Mountain of the Dead keeps its secrets, but it cannot keep them forever. Someday, somehow, the truth will emerge from the snow and ice, and the 9 young people who died on Khalat Siek will finally find peace. Until that day, their story remains one of the most compelling and mysterious in the annals of human experience. A reminder that even in our age of satellites and computers, of DNA analysis and forensic science, there are still phenomena that defy explanation. The Dyatlov Pass incident stands as a monument to the unknown, a testament to the enduring power of mystery in a world that believes it has all the answers. The Dyatlov Pass incident occurred between February 1 to 2, 1959, in the Ural Mountains of the Soviet Union. The 9 victims were students and graduates of the Ural Polytechnical Institute who died under mysterious circumstances during a ski expedition. Despite multiple investigations spanning more than 6 decades, the exact cause of their deaths remains unexplained. The incident continues to be one of the most studied and debated unsolved mysteries of the modern era.